Good morning. This is Dishha Bagchi for ThePrint, and we are back with Lieutenant General Retired H.S. Panag to discuss his column from this week. Statements from the Xi-Modi BRICS meeting show India once again misread Chinese intention. Welcome back, General. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Disha. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
So in this week's column, you explore how after the Xi-Modi meeting last month, India misinterpreted Chinese intentions when it came to resolving the border issue, given the difference in nature of the statements that the two countries gave. So to begin with, what do you think caused the Indian side to misread Chinese intent?
At the onset, one must also analyze as to what was the interpretation of India when Chinese carried out the intrusions in April, May 2020. Now, what had been happening in the past, and there's a long history of it, especially since 2013, then 2014, then in Doklam, is that Chinese would come and go back. However, right from the word go, and I recall mentioning this very early, somewhere on 28th of May 2020, or maybe on the 4th of June of 2020, that this time the Chinese intent is different. Somehow the impression was that in India was, even at that time, that it is one of those usual border incursions, and the Chinese will come for some time and there'll be a confrontation, there'll be negotiations, and they will go back. I think we missed the point, and which is amply clear to everybody, that the Chinese came with a clear intent. I'm talking of the military intent as related to the ground. The overall intent, of course, of asserting its hegemony was there. It came with a clear military intent to re-secure the 1959 claim line. We allowed them to achieve strategic surprise, and they came into unoccupied areas and denied us access to 1,000 square kilometers, starting from Depsong right down to Demchok at 4 or 5 odd places. Now, even now, somehow India has been thinking that no, it's just negotiations about their version of the LAC and our version of the LAC. Their version of the LAC is the 1959 claim line, and it has been so since 7th of August 1959. No change. They have not touched the Indus Valley because these are inhabited areas, and some of our villages are located there, and which would straight away imply war in case anything happens there. This is the main reason. At this juncture, now India thought that the stalemate has been going on for 3 years and 4 months, and incidentally, the trade between China and India has been growing by leaps and bounds. With the trade deficit against us, our imports have been increasing. So in a way, we were doing what the Chinese were saying all the time. The Chinese were saying, put the border issue aside and it's a historical issue and it'll take its own time. Let's mend our relations. Now, our relations, as far as trade and is concerned, the economic relations, there was really no change, barring a bit of tightening of the screws on the Chinese companies and a few apps and all that we barred. So it was happening. So India thought that G20 is a major event, and Chinese participation is desirable. And since it's a long time, and as it is, we are meeting, the relationship is, economic relationship is thriving. So maybe it is time that China will agree to a kind of a settlement as far as, what happened in 2020. Of course, it is very clear that status quo ante is virtually impossible. The very fact that we have conceded the buffer zones and barring the across north of Pengongso and on the Kailash range, they're all mostly in our territory. So we felt that China would also agree because of this to Depsang buffer zone, equitable buffer zone, as well as in Dangchok. Now, the Chinese had no intent of attending G20, which we thought that these talks, they had no intent whatsoever. China did not want to, India to gain absolute credit for conducting a world event, and Xi's presence was necessary. And China and Russia are in a kind of alliance, and Putin was not coming, so they have left the G20 as a meeting of as a summit of United States and its allies or like-minded countries. So this is how, in my view, we misread what the Chinese would want to do. They had no intentions of compromising on the 59 claim line, particularly with respect to Depsang and Dangchok.
Right. So you mentioned something interesting about how China had no intent whatsoever to attend the G20 summit this year. And many experts have been saying that this could be more harmful to China than India. So what do you think this is signifying about the current ties between India and China, the fact that Xi Jinping will be skipping the summit?
You see, it's not only between India and China. All these summits of G20, and others at the where the leaders of both sides, I mean, I'm talking of the China side and the United States side, attend. They are actually an interplay of the current state of international relations. So, what is the G20 today? And in fact, G20, if you see the G20 summit in Bali, which was held, last year, that was after a major confrontation between Taiwan and China. I mean, not a physical one. I'm saying a standoff between them after Pelosi visited Taiwan in August 2022. But the thing was that it was being held in the proper Asia Pacific.
Yeah.
It was being held in Indonesia, and this area was important. So China, despite the confrontation, went there, and Putin did not attend. And of course, the Chinese presence and others, any resolution, a kind of resolution that condemned Russian behavior in Ukraine was not passed. But this time, when they're coming here, the overall relationship just about remains the same. There is a confrontation going on between the United States and its allies, and now with India appearing to be siding with the United States in the Indo-Pacific. This is one factor as to why China kept away, and probably also Russia for its own reasons, Ukraine war, and otherwise because of the international power play. So that is one reason. The other reason is that China did not want India to gain credit and cement its place as a world power by showcasing a successful summit with probably a consensual with full consensus kind of a declaration, or a statement at the end of the summit. It did not want India to take the credit. So this is the reason why she is not likely to attend. Because there's hardly a week left. I would be surprised if he attends it. Now, as to what impact it has, see, I would say that not necessarily whatever has been decided in Johannesburg between President Xi and Prime Minister Modi is off the table. No. China may not have wanted to conclude it very early, while giving India double credit for the G20, and also for having concluded a kind of a peace agreement and claiming victory. The talks may talks may still go on, and there may still be a kind of an agreement. But that agreement, as I discussed in my last column, will be on the Chinese terms.
Yeah.
China is unlikely to give us an inch on Depsang and in south of Demchok. But if by negotiations, as I have mentioned, if we can negotiate an equitable buffer zone in Depsang and as well as in south of Demchok, it is still a fair agreement. So I will say that the hope is still there that post the G20 summit, there may be a sort of a meeting of foreign ministers, or I don't think at the heads of state meeting is likely in the near future, but there may be a meeting of foreign ministers, and these kind of a settlement may still take place.
It's interesting that you brought the point about how China was never really looking at letting India kind of show its success on the international sphere when it came to bringing consensus in the G20 summit. Because on Friday at a press conference, a Russian ambassador to India also mentioned that there were greater powers working against India achieving a joint communique at G20. So it was interesting. So look, moving forward, last week, China also released a new standard map of the country, and reiterating its claims over such regions like Aksai Chin and so on. So what do you think was behind this releasing this map at this stage, especially?
In a huge country where different departments do different things, such things do happen. I mean, to say that every event in China is controlled, by the Politburo would be wrong. And cartographic wars, are a known international ploy. Recall that India's borders, boundaries, with respect to Aksai Chin were undefined. It was a dotted line up to 1954. And then in 1954, Prime Minister decided that we must, cement our claims, and all maps of that type were withdrawn, and India's international boundary was shown, as it is shown today. So similarly, the Chinese maps at various times, in fact, we preempted them in this particular aspect. At that time, the Chinese maps had not started showing, all these areas, Nepal, Arunachal Pradesh, and complete Aksai Chin as part of them. Maybe the older maps, yes, but after China, the communists came to power in 49, they had really not published any maps. Of course, thereafter, these cartographic wars started. And this edition of the map is the 23rd edition of the standard map. It's called the standard map. But China is clever. Every time it makes a few modifications, it had the 7- line in the South China Sea. It made it 9-, and the last dash now is going almost east of Taiwan, which has recently appeared either this time or the last time. Then China passed a land border law, in 2021, which further says that, Chinese territories and sovereignty, etc., are inviolable, and it is the duty, and they have got proper plans to how to develop the border areas and how the territories have to be safeguarded. So I would say that it could be a coincidence, though if we do say that it was probably by design, then I would say the timing was not right. China was just rubbing it in that it's as much, its land is as much sacred to it as India's land it is to India. But I also want to mention one more thing, that it is when the Article 370 was revoked from J&K, and at that time we again we also again reiterated our maps. Fresh maps were brought out, to which China also objected, and we showed Ladakh as a union territory, and also what is occupied by Pakistan and what is occupied by China as part and parcel of the Indian territory.
You also suggest towards the end of your article that instead of settling, India should persist with a strategic stalemate. So how do you think such a future would look like for India, and how long do you think India could persist in this sort of a situation?
See, I dealt with the issue of strategic stalemate in my last column also, and even earlier, that the China's macro political strategic aim that was to impose its hegemony on India could not be achieved because India went into a confrontationist posture without escalating, and blocked the Chinese further ingress into India. And though, as we have discussed, it was not the Chinese intent to seize territory. So China also could not claim victory and move away. India did not capitulate because now China is afraid if China pulls out, then India will do a quid pro quo. It will reoccupy all these areas because it's got forces there. So both sides are, as part of what we say real politics, are stuck. And this endeavor by India was one way to break the impasse. Having said this, why did this ingress take place at all? It took place because there were areas which were not physically occupied by our forces. All these areas where the Chinese have come. Since 1987, and apart from the fracas in Galwan Valley, there has been no physical attack on each other. While the so-called Islami slicing, the Chinese have not come and overrun any of our posts. So to that extent, when Prime Minister Modi said that no post has been lost, is a fact. It's also a fact that in these areas where we were developing our border infrastructure, we had not physically established patrol posts. And on the logic of that, in disputed areas, finders are keepers, China simply walked in, and our surveillance failed. So it was our failure, political and military, that failed to read the Chinese intent, failed to read the correct signals, and allowed these areas to be unheld. So what I am saying is that in future, if we have to prevent such a thing happening, then we have to dot the border with ITBP posts. Even a man and dog's presence, I mean, I'm putting it proverbially, will not be challenged by China, because that would amount to war. And China, nobody wants to have a limited war because of the uncertain outcome. And for a great power, even a stalemate is defeat, as it is, as we were talking about the strategic stalemate. So, and the strategic stalemate is not that costly. It's a kind of it's just a media build-up that heavy cost and troops suffering. I mean, militaries are meant to do that. What is the military meant for, if not to guard your borders? Yes, instead of having a total of 3 brigades as part of 3 infantry division which used to look after eastern Ladakh. In fact, only 2 brigades used to look after 3 brigades, as I said, continue to look after eastern Ladakh. Now we have equivalent of 6 brigades and some reserves. It's no great burden on the exchequer. It's a manageable burden, and we can sustain it indefinitely. But we must not give China an inch inch in terms of getting an edge over us, inch in terms of declaring victory. Just a case in point is this issue of who initiated the talks. Now, how does it matter? The leaders had spoken to each other informally at Bali. Wang Yi had met both the foreign minister as well as the national security advisor more than once, and they have discussed these issues. Military commanders have been meeting, but they rubbed in the fact that it is India which has blinked, and the meeting was at the behest of Prime Minister Modi. Of course, it was informally denied by us, not officially, informally denied by us. So China lost no opportunity. So now if there's no agreement, if there's no equitable agreement that takes place, an honorable agreement, which is equidistant buffer zone in Depsang Plains and in south of Demchok, and then all buffer zones to be demarcated, jointly patrolled, so that neither side loses this thing, or patrolled on a fixed schedule, that your claims are not lost, verified by satellite imagery and so on. That kind of an agreement. If this kind of an honorable agreement is not reached, then it is better that we continue with the strategic stalemate and make it permanent, make it perfect by creating more ITBP posts, laying down our red lines that this far and no further, that if anything, now you cross anywhere, it would mean an act of war, and it would get military retaliation from India. Our infrastructure has improved. Our modernization is of course a continuous process. So I see absolutely no problem in maintaining the strategic stalemate, unless, as I said, we can get an honorable and a equitable kind of agreement, which even when you say buffer zone is lost for us, but for a long-term perspective of things, for our economy to develop, for our transformation to take place, it's a fair one that both sides had a confrontation over disputed areas. These areas were, the so-called areas of differing perceptions, and agreed to buffer zones was still a fair one, though still in favor of China. So all is not lost. I still see hope that, putting aside the fact that she is unlikely to come, but the talks will continue, and there may still an agreement may work out. If it does not work out, then the strategic stalemate must continue.
Right. Thank you, General. I think you brought up some very interesting points about what happened between India and China's relations over the past week when it came to the differences in statements of the two countries when it came about Xi Modi's meeting in Johannesburg, what might have led India to misread China's intent, Xi Jinping's unlikelihood to attend G20 and what might be the reason behind that, and also what India can do in the future when it comes to the border issue and the importance of the strategic stalemate. So for viewers interested in reading the full article by General Panag, the link to it is in the description below. Thank you, and we will see you next week.